I just figure that a senior executive at a bank isn't going to appreciate if I invade their inbox with a cold, hey, come hire my agency type of thing.
100%.
And the reason
Yeah.
I think that is I was on the other side. I was an exec.
Yeah.
I got 10 of these a day. I never read any of them or took them seriously. So I don't think that's the right channel for this business. I do think cold outbound could work in many other businesses, but I think it's just context dependent. And for what I'm doing, I think I might actually lose points with my customers if I go that direction. So I put a lot of content out, but I wait for someone to knock on my door before we start a conversation. I don't even have a pitch deck, Sean. I don't.
Yeah.
There's no reason for it because by the time they knock on my door, they've seen 20 of my posts and
Yeah.
they're convinced I know what I'm talking about.
Hello, I'm Sean Lyden, the CEO at Lyden Communications and the host of the Systematic Selling Podcast, where we share strategies, trends, and best practices to help you scale your sales and build a business you love. Today, Carlos Caro joins us on the pod. Carlos is a former executive at Credit Karma and Capital One, but in February, he launched his new startup, New Market Growth. It's an agency that helps lenders and credit card issuers acquire more customers through credit marketplaces like Credit Karma, Experian, and NerdWallet. And that's why I invited Carlos to join us today. I wanted to hear from someone in the trenches who is successfully finding and closing their first customers. What's working for Carlos as he gets his agency off the ground? The short answer: consistently posting content on LinkedIn. How's he doing it? Carlos breaks down his strategy for us. He also talks about how his background in math and being a semi pro poker player have shaped his approach to entrepreneurship and sales. So get ready for this fascinating conversation with Carlos on episode 15 of the Systematic Selling Podcast. Carlos, welcome to the pod.
It's great to be here, Sean. Thanks for having me.
Well, appreciate you coming on board, Carlos. Now, where I wanted to start with to give our audience a context of where you come from in your career. So you grew up, if I understand correctly, you grew up in Fairfax, Virginia, not too far outside of DC. Is that correct?
That's right.
Awesome. And so you've got a strong math background, finance. Is that something that as you were growing up that wow, that's a direction I want to go? What were some of the key triggers for you that went, yeah, I love numbers, I love math, and this direction I want to study?
Yeah. I mean, it was always like an effortless thing for me. So
Yeah,
I never really paid attention in math class. It's weird because you would
yeah,
expect I'd be taking notes and all into it, but
yeah.
I was bored 90% of the time in the class because like
Wow.
they'd say things once and I'd kind of get it. And then, the rest of the class was 8 examples of the same principle. And I was just, I kind of got it the first time. So, but I found hobbies where I could use math. Like I was into baseball as a kid and, like,
Studying the stats and
yeah,
everything. Yeah,
perfect hobby for a kid into numbers.
yeah.
So like they talk about the batting averages and all the slugging, all that ERAs. And I was like, okay, like and I was like unpacking what those stats meant and kind of it had like a special meaning to me as a kid that was into the stuff. And I played baseball too. So that was a nice little outlet for me.
Yeah,
Later in life it became poker because there's like the psychological side, there's the quantitative
100%.
side. Played chess for a little while, which is
Yeah,
less about math, but it has kind of that strategic thinking element to it. So
yeah.
it was always just fun for me and effortless. And when I got to college, honestly, I wasn't even sure I could get through college in anything outside of math. Like I
Really.
saw my peers in like history, like I was at Columbia, so there's a lot of liberal
Yeah,
arts kids.
yep.
and I'd see the stack of books they came back with. They had 10 books that they had to read that week. And like every time I wrote a book, I was like falling asleep. I couldn't do
Yeah.
it. At least in that content area. I mean, today I read a ton, but I read about, I'll read about business. I'll read about it's
Yeah.
generally nonfiction stuff I like, but so I eventually got into reading later in life, but in college I was just like, I just don't think I can get through this thing any other way. So it was more of a defense mechanism than anything else. And then throughout my career, I tapped back into my writing and some of the other skill sets that I've actually had all the way through. I just didn't recognize them until later.
Let me hit the pause button real
Yeah.
quick because, you know, later in your career, you got into sales and business development. And when most people think of folks being in sales, having a strong math background is not one of the key traits. They're normally looking at people, normally sales reps, the conventional wisdom is that you have a humanities background,
Mhm.
you're huge on communication. In some cases, it's, you tend to be extroverted, which is not the case for me. I'm
Yeah.
an introvert.
Yeah.
But the so how did you see your math background? Now, are you an introvert, extrovert? How would you classify yourself in that
Um,
realm?
if you had asked me when I was in college, I would have said extrovert.
Really?
Um,
Okay.
if you asked me today, I probably lean more introvert. But when I test, I've tested on this multiple times. I'm right on the line.
Yeah, and they
So
call that an ambivert.
yeah, so I think there are moments where I know I just need to go on a walk or meditate or read a book and just do something by myself. And there are moments where I get energy from others, and it just I don't I don't have an easy time predicting when that's going to be. But I do a nice job cutting across those two modes when I need to. So I think that's made me highly adaptable to other individuals because I can figure out quickly where's the other side of the conversation here on that spectrum. Like, are they an introvert or an extrovert? So I find a way to relate to each of those types of people in different ways.
If I'm hearing you correctly, are you saying that the discipline that you learned through math, it it can actually help you read people?
I think reading people is something I developed. I don't know that
Hmm.
I can connect it to math
Okay.
necessarily. But to your question, I've always been in an inherently quantitative field. Like
Hmm.
I'm in lending, so
Yeah.
you really can't approach the business of lending without a really strong quantitative background. Like it's all about data and risk and
100%.
processing numbers. So if you're going to be a sales guy in that world,
Yeah.
you better have a solid foundation and at least the business of lending. But it's even better, and I found I get a lot of respect from potential clients when I can relate with them deeply on machine learning, statistics, etc. So like I have higher credibility as a salesperson with the background
100%.
in math. So I think there's a credibility part of that.
Okay.
And I know we're going to get to this later, but like my approach to sales isn't like I don't think of sales as sales. I'm not trying to convince anybody of
Yeah.
anything. Like I view sales as empathizing with another individual and communicating how I can help that individual as clearly as possible and as succinctly as possible. That's what I view my job as in like a sales mode. I've never seen across my career, or maybe I can count them on one hand, the moments where I met an individual and my read of that individual was they're not interested, they're not gonna buy. And I was somehow able to convince them through like an arduous process to go do something they don't want to do.
Yeah.
I just don't bump into that very often. What I bump into is someone has a natural interest for what I know or what I do, and we build a relationship. And maybe the moment isn't then where we do a transaction or where we work together, but over time, those opportunities materialize. So, like, I view sales as like this really, really long game where I'm actually not trying to close a deal on the first call or the second call or
Yeah.
ever until I get signal from the other side that there's something here.
Yeah, the way I would think of it is you're not looking to convince, you're looking for alignment. So the way your analytical skills are, you're able to spot the people that perhaps would align to what you're to what you're looking to offer. Is that accurate?
I think that's right. I think that's
Yeah.
right. I mean, the way it works out in practice in my business today is I ask folks open-ended questions around what they're doing, what they're
Yeah.
struggling with, the context. So I try to learn as much as I can. And then the judgment I'm making on that call is, do I realistically think I can help this person, not just a little bit, but materially?
Yeah.
Right? Because like I don't think my business is going to get anywhere by taking on a client where I make them 2% or 5% better. Like that's
Yeah.
not those aren't the case studies I want to write up on my
Yeah.
website. I
Yeah.
want to find the cases where I can make someone 5x better. And when I see those moments where I can really accelerate what somebody's doing, that's where I lean in and I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
here are the places, and I'll start articulating and even giving them almost the strategy. And my sense is some of the folks I talk to say, hey, this was great. I'm gonna go do that on my own. I'm happy if that's the outcome. Like if I can educate someone in half an hour and they can go do something with it, great. But what I find most of the time is they need help along the way. They want the thought partnership,
Yeah.
and they'll bring me along, and we'll partner together on it. But it's that leverage. We were talking about that earlier
Yeah.
before we hopped on the call. It's like where I think I can apply a lot of leverage to a situation. That's where I really die. That's where I really dig in, and where I don't see that, I'm candid with the other side. I'm like, hey, look, really don't think I can help you. Here's why. And if I can offer a couple tips, I'll do it. But that's yeah, I think we're saying the same thing. I'm putting it into slightly different words.
No, that's great. Now, so let's go back to the thread of your story then. So you went to undergrad at Columbia, New York, studying math, and then from there you went to graduate school at Johns Hopkins. Is that correct? Or where
Yeah,
did
it
you
was
go?
I did end up back at Hopkins later.
Okay, gotcha.
But right out of undergrad, I got this really interesting opportunity with a group of researchers in Cambridge, Mass.
Okay.
And it was a mix of Harvard and MIT professors. So like some of the smartest people on the planet when it comes to like behavioral economics and research. David Laibson was the professor that hired me, and they were offering me like $30,000. Like it was like
Yeah, nothing for
I can guarantee you I had one of the worst salaries coming out of Columbia Engineering. Like
yeah.
it was bad, but the opportunity to learn was what got me excited.
Yeah.
So I ended up there not only contributing analytically to the research that they were doing. So like they were handing me data sets from like Fortune 500 companies on how people invest their money in 401ks, and they were spotting all the flaws in how people made all these
Yeah.
decisions and writing papers about it. So I was one of those analysts behind the scenes calculating the numbers. But then the other thing that this helped me with my self-awareness and where I took my career later, I'd also go back to David with thoughts on like how to actually articulate the idea differently in his paper. So not just the number, but like, hey, how about we say it that way or this way?
Yeah.
So I'd actually like just put those suggestions in kind of the margins of the paper. And he loved that. And then he ended up getting some of his research buddies in other institutions to call me, and I was kind of, playing editor for them. So
Yeah.
that's I started building my writing chops in that role. And then later at Capital One, I built my brand as an analyst around the guy who could not only do the numbers, but who could communicate it well to the executives.
Yeah.
So other people helped me see that dimension on the communication side. But yeah, that's where I started, was in Cambridge, Mass, academic research, and then all the folks I was working with ended up in these top econ programs.
Right.
Many of them at Harvard, Penn, all the ones you've heard of. I ended up at Columbia with a full ride and a grant from the NSF, which meant I didn't have to work, I didn't have to do anything. Tuition was covered, even like, you know, short vacation money. I had it
Really?
was
So
just
you
a
had a
really
room
great
and
deal.
board, everything.
Yeah, it was
Thank
a really,
God.
really nice setup.
Yeah.
And then a year into it, I just decided this isn't for me, and I took a hard, sharp turn to another direction. But that, yeah, that's
Okay.
where it started.
Let's hit the pause button there.
Yeah,
So you're a year into it. You had a pretty nice gig. It sounds like everything's taken care of. I take it you weren't married with a family at this point,
yeah,
correct?
not yet.
And so this you're a year into it and you decide to go, let's try something else. What was going on there? What was the trigger that got you thinking, I've got this comfort here, but I want to do something different?
It was a combination of things. So for one, I wasn't I wasn't a good student at that time. I was getting like, I don't know, B's, C's, which sounds okay, but I had been straight A my whole life. So
Right.
like I wasn't performing, number one.
Was
Number
that by
two, I
choice?
looked at what was that?
Was that by choice? Meaning your board wasn't really interested in it, or were you struggling with it?
In retrospect, it was by choice. It's obvious
Okay.
to me that it wasn't. I think had I put my mind to it, I could have been doing it. But my mind and my heart wasn't into
Yep.
it. And then I just started observing like folks coming out of the program, what were they doing? And they were,
Yeah.
they were junior professors at other universities writing papers on pretty esoteric topics that I was pretty sure 99.9% of people couldn't comprehend what they were writing about.
Yeah.
So what was missing for me was like the real world impact. And I didn't see that materializing in kind of the career path I was marching down.
Yeah.
And it was around that same time I started getting into poker. So I was playing underground games in New York City,
Wait.
making
Well, hold
extra
on.
money there.
How did you find these underground opportunities to be playing
I
like
just
that?
heard about
That
them from
isn't
friends
advertised.
or
Yeah.
saw someone post it online, or I actually don't even remember how I found, but there was one
Had you
club
played poker before?
I
I
had,
mean,
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
So you knew
I
the
had been
game.
playing online for about 6 months at that point.
Okay.
But then like the live dimension captured my attention. Like it was I could get to the club in 10 minutes from where I lived. And I lived in the Upper West Side and it was like 20 blocks. So it was like a short subway ride to the
Yeah.
club.
Yeah.
I was just enjoying it. So like I think that like that kind of filled a void of like I kind of knew inside that this PhD program wasn't the thing.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if this poker thing was the thing either, but like it captured my attention in the moment. It was a lot of fun. I was making money, and you know, it was a material distraction on my studies for sure.
What was most fascinating about playing poker? Like what fired you up the most about it?
The the thing that struck me about it was how quickly I was coming up the learning curve on something like I just hadn't touched. Like I hadn't seen this for my whole life. And
Yeah.
the year prior, I had started playing games and again with like the folks in Cambridge,
Yeah.
the economics folks, they had their weekly game, very friendly for $20. So I started kind of learning the mechanics there. And then I read a book about it, and one book turned to two. Before you knew it, I'd gone through like 20, 30 books on the topic.
Wow.
And it was just working. Like I was making, $50 an hour just playing poker and having a good time.
Were you playing 5 days a week, 6, 7 days? How often were you
No,
playing?
maybe 2 days, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I tend to go on the weekends. You
Yeah.
know, that's when that's when I found people with day jobs would go and just want to have a little fun and donate some
But
money to the game.
but
Yeah.
did you even have a day job or
No, I was on the grant. I was on the grant as a
oh, so
student.
you're still on the grant, but
I was still on the
you got out of
grant,
the
so that
program.
meant I had a little bit of money,
Uh-huh.
like a little bit of capital to play with.
Yeah.
Not a ton. I had to be pretty careful with how I deployed it. So I played in games that were anywhere from $300 to $500 buy-in. Nothing
Yeah.
huge. But if I had a bad day, it would sting. As a
Yeah.
student, you don't really have that much extra money. So, that taught me around like how to manage a bankroll and taught me like the swings and up and downs and the variance and like how to think about that. So there was a lot of connectivity to like math and stats in that phase of my life.
I'm curious about the connectivity between that and sales and being a founder, because there are a couple things I picked up on as you were talking. One is you became a student of the game or student of the
Mhm.
craft,
Yep.
which is huge in any endeavor. And then I imagine when you're playing in poker, you have to have both an analytical mind in terms of probabilities and then also a mind to be able to read people and determine how other people are going to respond. Is that is that an accurate assessment? And how would you make the connection of things that perhaps influenced you during that year of playing
Yeah.
poker to what you're doing now?
There's a lot of like I'm actually working on a book on this topic. So
Are you really?
yeah. So I could
Love
talk
it.
for hours on it, but
I
I'll give
can't
you
wait
some
for
ideas.
that.
And by the way, I still play. So poker is like that. It got started then, but I these days I play maybe once a month. I
Yeah,
don't play a lot, but I enjoy it, and it's still like this little extra source of income for me.
that's great.
It's money I use to go out to dinner, and so like it's nothing like I don't depend on it, but
Yeah.
I still find myself winning. And look, I think the early insights for me was I had always relied on like external validation.
Mhm.
Like I'd always been a good student, so like my self-worth, my validation came from getting good grades and having my parents tell me I was a good student and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
And then poker was this thing where I was like I felt like I had an edge. I felt like I could win. And I put my mind to studying up and I actually did it. Like I
Wow.
could see, and like it was like something where I was just like, and I think this is maybe where like my entrepreneurial spirit was kind of materialized in the real world. But I
Yeah.
realized I could bet on myself, and when I didn't fully understand something, I could do the hard work to figure it out, and that I could produce, quantifiable rewards for me on the other side of it. So
Yeah.
I view that as kind of my first venture was as a poker player, and it was a profitable one for sure. But to your question on sales, I would say a couple things about it. One is probably 45% of the times I've ever played poker, I've lost.
Mhm.
So poker teaches you, look, regardless of how well you play, there are things outside of your control.
Yeah.
Same exact thing with sales. I can have the best conversation, but
So
that
true.
person may not be ready to buy. They may not have the budget. There's 1,000 things outside of my control.
Yeah.
And poker just like taught me that lesson immediately of like, okay, well, when things don't go my way, I'm not gonna cry about it or say woe is me or get bummed. Like that's just life, like
Yeah.
there's external variables. So I think I developed a really thick skin in poker. Like there's nights I've lost thousands of dollars. There's nights I've won thousands. Like, and on the other side of that too, when things go well, you have a lot of gratitude. Like you only ever win in poker if the cards go your way.
Yeah.
That's just reality. Like you don't win in poker because you're so good and you're so great. No, like the cards actually had to favor you that time.
Yeah.
So you build a sense of gratitude for everything that you have. And I view that the same way in my business. Like anytime I close a deal, I'm not like, oh, I'm so great and awesome. I'm like, wow, I'm so fortunate that I have this opportunity to work with this individual that like values my skill set. So that's a little bit more of an emotional answer, but it plays a big role into how I
It's
approach things,
huge.
how I think of like how I view, business.
Yeah, you're you're able to take the ups and downs that are typical of sales and you're able to minimize it close to that baseline, which keeps you focused on
That's
doing
right.
the things that you need to do, because too high, too low, you're wasting a ton of energy and focus that you become incredibly inefficient. So,
No, I love how you put that, and I think it's one of my core differentiators in my career as an exec, but now as an entrepreneur is like my emotional range is narrow, man. Like
yes.
my highs aren't that high, my lows aren't that low. I focus on the process and I think long term, and poker taught me that. Because like when I was on a high in poker and I thought I was so great, the next day I'd just get humbled, right? And when I was on a low and thinking I'd never play again, a month would pass and I'd say, oh, I would play back the hands where I lost. And I was like, you know what? That was just bad luck. I didn't approach it wrong. I didn't think about it wrong. I just, the cards didn't break my way. Let me go back. Right. And you start to build a certain level of resilience that I don't believe you can learn academic. I don't believe you can read a book and be like, here's how to be resilient. I just don't believe that exists. I think you have to go out there and get your ass kicked hundreds, if not thousands of times
Agree.
before you can have kind of that even keeled approach to things. And I was lucky to build that kind of early on.
Yeah, you got to be in that crucible and feel the heat and at times, you know, succumb to it, but then keep getting back up. And eventually you see things coming that you've seen before and you learn to, you know, continue straight ahead.
Yeah.
And what you're talking about here is so at the heart of when I think of systematic selling, in the sense that being systematic isn't necessarily creating 100% result of what the customer will do or how the prospect will respond, because everyone's human.
Hmm.
It will not produce, it will not always produce predictable results.
Correct.
The value of it is the process for you when you don't feel like doing certain things on a certain day because emotions are either up or down. It's the systematic aspect of things, the systems that keep you doing the things that you need to do, where things will eventually even out for you if you continue the course. And I love what you said about when you play poker, 45% of the time you're losing. And you know that from baseball. Your
Hmm.
best hitters in the world, 70% of the time, they're they're losing.
Right.
And yet you keep going up, getting your at bats. And that's such what you said. There's such a powerful metaphor that as a founder, or if you're a sales rep, you've got to be able to be comfortable with kind of the micro losing so that
Hmm.
you can stay on task to achieve the major wins. That's a fantastic metaphor. Appreciate you
Yeah.
sharing that, man.
Yeah, no. And I mean, just one thought as you were sharing that popped back into my head. Like the baseball poker thing is interesting because
Yeah, it
in
is,
both
isn't it?
baseball and poker, you have an opportunity and you can you can decipher whether you won or lost very quickly,
Yeah,
right? Like you can ask that hitter or that player, did you win or lose? And they'll give you a very concrete, immediate answer.
yeah,
That is not the case in sales. I just want to point that out and just like linger on that for a second because
yeah.
I
Unpack
was
it.
looking at my pipeline this morning.
Yeah,
There's 12 lenders I've spoken with recently.
yeah,
If you had to tell me did I win or lose each of those deals, I couldn't tell you right now
yeah,
because the game plays out over long periods of time. I could tell you my feeling of how which way those things are going to go, but it's based on imperfect information. It's based on a whole heck of a lot of stuff. I'm not going to find out maybe for years on whether or not I won those deals. Like hopefully most of them I'll find out this year. But if I'm being practical, like there was a conversation I had last year in the summer
Yeah.
that turned into a yes, a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
And now we're in like the procurement process, and like it's still not a real yes until there's a signed deal, right? So like the patient, like the amount of patience you have to have just to even know if it worked is crazy.
Yes.
So it's like sales is one of the places where if you're not patient and don't have discipline and can't emotionally handle that, you need a new profession because like you're not going to get the feedback loop that most people get. That it's like, you know, shorter.
100%. And especially as a founder that's dependent on these sales for revenue. I mean,
Exactly.
it's that's huge. Let's go on your journey now. So you spent about a year where you're a full-time poker player. Is that when you went into the corporate world with Capital One, or what were the
Yeah.
steps that
Yeah, it was
got you
about,
there?
I had been playing for about a year,
Yeah.
and I had just noticed that despite all the things it taught me about like handling volatility and all of that, it was like, man, the life I saw the lifestyle of the players that played for a living, and it's not what I wanted for myself or my
Yeah.
family.
Yeah.
Like, there were years where they were, you know, making millions. There were years where they were losing millions. It was
Yeah.
like that's just that's a level of financial chaos that I didn't want for myself personally.
Yeah.
So I kind of looked at it and said, okay, I think I'll end up enjoying this game playing for a very long time. I was convinced of that. I was also convinced I didn't want it as my primary source of income because
Yeah.
it was really hard to predict, and it did put you mentally in some very difficult positions and financially into very difficult positions. So I said, okay, let me let me try this. I had a friend that was at Capital One,
Mhm.
and I had kind of been sharing with him what I was been up to. And he said, look, I think you'd love it here. Like we solve problems, it's real world, it's practical.
Yeah.
Like your background in econ and math, I think would be great. Why don't you interview? So he set me up with a recruiter. I went through it. I got the job. And then it just things started moving from there.
Yeah.
It was promoted in a year. 6 months later was promoted again. A year later was promoted again.
So
So
your initial job was as an analyst,
as an
correct?
analyst, yeah, like I
Any
had the
specific
job.
division in Capital
Credit
One?
cards.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Credit cards. Yeah. So crunching numbers, analyzing marketing programs for the most part.
Yeah.
Like, for example, if we send this piece of direct mail to these customers based on the historical performance, how much money do you think the bank will make? How much risk are we taking on? How will those revenues come in over time? It's like a bunch of modeling.
Yeah.
Uh, so I had a lot of fun with it, but the one of the puzzles I had early in my career was I saw myself getting promoted at a much faster rate than my peers.
Yeah.
And I wasn't as good of an analyst as many of them.
Yeah.
The best analysts weren't the ones moving up. And I don't know whether to call it imposter syndrome. There was some disconnect for me. I'm like, hey, why am I advancing versus my peers who are actually better analysts aren't? And like eventually I realized it's because like I would compare my written work with theirs. And even though they
Communication.
understood problems better than I did, they couldn't communicate them as clearly to executives.
Yeah.
So, and I'll get to this later on kind of my sales philosophy.
Yeah.
But just because you're an expert in something doesn't mean it's valuable to someone else.
100%.
I mean, you have to be able, like the other person has to understand the thing and
Yeah.
actually extract value for themselves. And if you can't bridge that from wherever you're an expert, like you can't monetize it. So,
Yeah.
and I'm seeing that very clearly now and as an entrepreneur. So I was able to bridge that gap. And then, from there I was like, okay, well, if my superpower is communication with an analytics background,
Yeah.
should I really be here as an analyst at this company for the rest of my career? And at the time I concluded no. I should probably go be a sales guy or a business development guy, or
Yeah.
I don't know. I didn't know exactly what that looked like, but
Right.
my next role out of Cap One was a sales role. And then from there, I ended up in business development. And that was really my niche where it's like, okay, yeah, I don't need to be on sales calls all day. That's not my zone. But finding value, conceiving of partnerships, that's something I'm really good at. And I've been there ever since like 2016. So like last 8 years, that's been my zone.
Yeah. And real quick before we go on to your new venture, if you could delineate the difference between sales and business development, because so often folks get that mixed up, but they are
Yeah.
two different roles.
Yeah. There's a lot of sneaky differences here with
Okay.
sales and BD. I'll give it my best shot.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know that this is necessarily like the universal answer, but at least in my
No.
context, it's
Yeah.
I think there's a clear difference. So in a sales role, I found that there's a clear product or service that you're selling somebody. It's well defined.
Yeah.
Your customer is well defined. Your value prop is well defined, and your pipeline is usually given to you by someone.
Yeah.
So your role is making these conversations that happen over and over really efficient,
Hmm.
building process, building systems,
Hmm.
and maximizing that close rate over time.
Yeah.
Right. So I view it as like a maximization, like optimization type of role. But people that succeed in sales have a high amount of energy, are extremely disciplined, love being with people all day,
Mm.
aren't always quantitative or analytical, but they can spend 8 hours on the phone and they love it. They get
Yeah.
energy. That is not me for just a number of reasons.
Sure.
If I think BD, I've been doing business development in the context of lenders and like marketplaces.
Yeah.
And usually the idea is when two companies come together and they bring different assets and abilities and, whether it be data assets, product assets, audiences,
Yeah.
1 + 1 = 3 when you do it right in a partnership.
Yeah.
So business development is there's no product list that I'm selling necessarily. I just know my company's assets extremely well, and I've researched the prospect's company's assets, and
Hmm.
I have a thesis that I can pull together that says, hey, when we join forces, we can build this better, bigger thing together as a joint entity versus as, you know, as separate entities. So there's a lot more creativity to be,
Yeah.
in my opinion, and there's just a lot more unknown. There's no one can give you exactly the roadmap per se. Sometimes it is clear. Like I've had roles where it's just like, okay, I need to go hunt down partners that look like
Here are the
this. There's
partners.
cookie
Yeah.
cutter deal structure. So that's yeah, I've bumped into that. That's certainly true. But the deals I've worked on that have been the most fun, that were the ones that were kind of unobvious. And then as we got into it, we kept piecing out bits and pieces that made the partnership special. So,
Yeah. That makes complete sense. Now, you you had the several years in corporate sales, corporate business development as you moved up. And then just recently, you launched your own company, New Market Growth.
hmm?
What led you to leave what some people would say, this is dependable income,
Hmm.
somewhat predictable life, to becoming a founder, which, especially starting out, it's the exact opposite.
Right.
What was the what was the triggering point that said, you know what, I'm better off to go off on my own venture here?
Yeah. I had just come off another venture, actually. So this is my second venture.
Okay.
My first venture like flopped flat on its face.
Really?
And I've written about it on LinkedIn. I'll send you some of the stuff.
Yeah, please
Yeah,
do.
I built a consumer marketplace for finding a lawyer. Uh, it's like it was like super outside my core area. Like it
Which
wasn't
sounds like a
financial
great
service.
idea, but it,
I may come back to it at some point.
yeah,
Uh, but I spent a year on that and I ended up shelving it.
yeah.
And I wanted to get back into fintech.
Hmm.
And at that point, I had built out a platform that's pretty well known in the industry. It's called Lightbox. It was a marketing platform that Credit Karma built. But I was the go-to-market executive that
Okay.
brought that to market. And when I was back on the job market, I don't know, I was under some delusion that like I'd get a lot of credit for doing that and that everyone would think I was amazing
Yeah.
and that I would just be handed all these offer letters. And it was like the exact opposite,
Uh-huh.
John. Like nobody knew who I was, nobody cared about what I did.
Yeah.
They were like, why should I hire you for an exec? Or like, prove to me that you're good. Tell me your story. So like I went from a mindset of, oh, this is gonna be the easiest job search in the world to like, who the hell are you? Like
So you
literally.
essentially hit a ceiling.
Yeah. I was just like,
Wow.
oh wow, this is bad, right? So,
Yeah.
but then I did a little reflection on it. And I was like, okay, well, this is entirely my fault. Like the fact I don't have a good personal brand is because I haven't built it.
Right.
Not anybody else's fault. Like, why am I putting it on them? Of course they don't know who I am.
Sure.
So that was one of these really big like oh shit moments I had.
How long
And
ago was that?
that was 2 years ago.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, a little over like 2.5 years ago. So the oh shit moment was like November 2021. And then I didn't do anything about it until March the next year. But then I started writing on LinkedIn every single day.
Mm.
And I was like, look, if people don't know who I am and what I did, the way to change that is just to start being visible, right? To start writing about my experiences and just like
Yes.
pound away on writing. And I wrote about, lessons I learned as an analyst, lessons I learned as a poker player, lessons I
Yeah.
learned in my first failed venture. I was kind of all over the board. I didn't have a zone I was hitting.
Sure.
I was just like, I'm just going to be out there.
Yeah.
And my network, I think in the first year doubled from 2,500 connections to 5,000 connections, something like
Nice.
that.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, this is great for networking, right? And that's where I met Dan Manning, which you had on
Yeah.
your. So it's just an example of kind of the folks I met along the way.
Absolutely.
But it's not like job offers were coming in and, people wanting to hire me, but
Yeah.
I had a little bit more visibility. So like
Yeah.
and the thing that surprised me about the writing is like CEOs would tell me they like to post. Like board members would tell me they like to post. Like senior people that I didn't think were on the platform
Yeah.
were actually complimenting me on my writing. And like that was not an expectation I had when I started doing it. But then the light bulb clicked of, oh, okay, like powerful, influential people are reading this stuff. Clearly, I can write in a way that's compelling that
Yeah.
people appreciate. Now let me try to do something with this thing, right? So that was about a year later. So
Okay.
March last year, let's call it.
Yep.
I was like, okay, well, the thing I understand best is how lenders should approach their affiliate marketing programs. I've seen that from the lender side, I've seen that from the affiliate side, I've seen that from my Capital One days. I had a number of different angles.
Yeah.
And it's a topic like I could talk for hours about with no prep, which is like advice I've actually seen thrown around in LinkedIn is like if you can talk about a topic for hours with no prep, like it's probably something you can lean
Yeah.
into in
That's your
social
domain.
media. So I just started writing, a post or two a week on that topic. I still kept writing about other topics.
Yeah.
But what started happening is with people I'd never met in my life would ping me and say, hey, that article was cool. Can you send it to me? I want to forward it to my boss. Can we
Love
hop
it.
on a quick call? I have a question about it.
Yeah.
So like 5, 6 months into it, I had a sales pipeline. I had a whole bunch of people that were curious to know more about what I knew about that topic.
Yeah.
But I was a full-time exec at another fintech. I didn't have time to go take these
Yeah.
deals.
Yeah.
And I was fortunate that another former colleague of mine from Credit Karma had recently left his position. He was taking some time off, but he and I worked together on some of those things at Credit Karma.
Yeah.
And I just called him and I was like, would you ever take like these consulting gigs with lenders? And his answer on the spot of the moment was, oh, I'm already considering doing that. I want to do that. So he was sold before I even picked up the
Oh,
phone.
that's awesome.
And then I walked him through what I was doing and like how I
Yeah.
was generating interest through my writing. And he's like, yeah, let's just collaborate on it. So he started taking clients last year. And then it got to the point where it's like, okay, I don't know exactly where this is going,
Yeah.
but there's already some income coming through this. I'm not quitting into an abyss and like not having any cash flow to pay the bills. Like
Right.
I'm quitting with something. Like clearly there was a pipeline. We had two clients, and I said, okay, this is the time to take the leap. So took the leap early this year, and we've kind of been building from there.
So if I heard you correctly, the key thing that has begun your pipeline has been the work you've been doing on building your personal brand on LinkedIn,
100%.
sharing your expertise and so forth. I want to dive into that a little more
Mhm.
in a second, but before we do, if you can explain to those outside of the industry
Mhm.
what exactly new market growth does, like when you're using terms lender, examples of that, and then when
Mhm.
you're saying affiliate marketing and
Yep.
how you help them maximize that. If you can
Sure.
break that down, and then we'll
Yeah.
dive into your go to market strategy.
Yeah. So so my clients are lenders, credit card companies, personal loan providers for like consumer lenders,
Okay.
so like if you
So
hopped
like
on
a Capital
creditcards.com.
One
Yeah, like
and
Capital One,
yeah,
Citibank, organizations like that that issue
yeah,
credit cards or personal loans. They tend to be banks. They're not always banks, but they tend to be banks most of the time.
yeah.
But they're institutions that lend money straight to customers, right? So they get their word out in Google search and in
Hmm.
direct mail and on TV, and there's a number of ways they communicate to customers.
Yeah,
But there's these marketplaces that have emerged over the last 10 years. Credit Karma is an example, Experian Marketplace is an example,
yeah,
NerdWallet is an example, where those marketplaces actually have the credit data on the customer. They know who the customer is, they know their FICO score, they know how many cards they have the whole credit file on the customer.
yeah,
So a savvy lender can partner with one of those affiliate marketplaces to say, here's my strategy. Here are the types of customers I want. Let me tell that to you in a really granular way. And when you see them log in, present my offer. So what that does in practice is it makes someone like if you went to creditcards.com and chose a credit card at random,
yeah,
you might get approved 20-30% of the time. Because creditcards.com doesn't have a good way to know which card really is the right fit for you
yeah,
based on your credit. Credit Karma, Experian, NerdWallet, some of these channels, they're doing 90% approval rates because the marketing is so targeted to the specific kind of user.
yeah,
But these platforms are new, they're complicated. There's a bunch of little nuances with the data and how they work. There's like machine learning algorithms in the background determining
hmm,
whether or not they should show your card or your competitor's card. So there's a lot of details there. And unlike Google or Facebook, if you do an internet search on how do I build a marketing program on Credit Karma or Experian Market, you're just not going to get anything back. Like you
because
might
that
stumble into
secret
some of my
sauce.
link, yeah, you might stumble into some of my LinkedIn posts
Right, right.
on those topics, but you're not going to see any definitive guides.
Yeah,
Uh, so lenders are left to fend on their own to kind of figure it out, and they usually figure it out through trial and error. And the marketplaces themselves obviously have people that they deploy to spend time with those lenders. But my observation when I worked at Credit Karma is that we didn't deploy enough partnerships folks on our lending partnerships.
yeah,
Like our lenders wanted to spend 10 hours with us a week, and we had
right.
1 hour a week to give them. So like I saw the supply demand imbalance. So like the concept for my agency is like, well, if I can come in and help these lenders build and help them, help teach them how the tools work and how the marketplaces work, it's really a growth. Really, what I'm selling is growth on their customer
Yeah.
acquisition strategies. So instead of booking 5,000 new customers a month, they can book 20,000 new customers a month because they've solved how to deploy their marketing in the right way. And by the way, it's custom to each channel. So
Yeah.
it's not a one size fits all answer. Karma's answer is a little different from Experian, is a little different from NerdWallet. So like there's all those little nuances, but that's what we do. So like we're out there to help lenders build their marketing programs.
Okay, so your customer is the lender and not the affiliate platform,
That's right.
correct?
Yeah. We're
Okay.
representing the lender.
And so you're functionally, if I'm hearing you correctly, you're essentially a business development consulting rep for the lender in terms of you're seeking out potential partnerships that can be advantageous to the lender. Is that
That's one
accurate?
part of the
Or
business.
okay, what are the
The
other parts?
other part of the business is, and this is where my business partner's skill set comes in.
Yeah,
So there's the deal making side, which you just shared.
yeah,
Like, for example, if I'm working with a new client right now that wants me to open some of the doors to those big marketplaces. And my
yeah,
relationships there and what I know about those channels, I think can help make that happen.
yeah,
But my business partner has a credit background. So he's super familiar with the credit bureaus and their data sets and how that all works. And the reason that's important is there's a translation that needs to happen from the lender's underwriting. So like how
hmm,
they actually make decisions to approve someone for a loan.
yeah,
It's all coded up in Python. It's complicated. There's machine learning models that has to get translated to these affiliate marketplaces somehow. And doing that is like an unintuitive, not straightforward. It's kind of a messy, you know, like you need data scientists and engineers to figure that out.
yeah,
And that my business partner is an expert in that part of it. So, so not only do we open the doors to some of those channels, but I mean, some of our clients have been in those channels for years,
yeah,
and they hired us to optimize what they already do by getting into the data and making their models just, 5% better. Because
yeah,
5% better for them could be millions of extra customers, millions of extra dollars in revenue. So we play on the edges optimizing for some clients, and for some clients, we're actually building net new programs. So it really depends on the maturity of the client.
And prior to you guys entering into this market, the burden would be exclusively on the affiliate and the lender trying to figure it out on how they can work together.
Yeah, and just to explain that dynamic, they're talking for half an hour once a week.
Yeah,
That's generally the how that goes, right? Because
yeah,
those on both sides, they have other partners, they have other stuff going on, and they can invest half an hour a week to kind of get this thing going. And the resulting outcomes is it can take 6 months or a year to get a program off the ground. And what we want to see for our clients is we come in and we just turbocharge that. What
yeah,
might have taken a year takes a month because we're just doing nothing but getting this thing done and getting it set up. And we hope to have relationships with the marketplace affiliates at some scale where they build onboarding uh, paths or lanes just for us because
yeah,
they
yeah,
trust us enough to kind of take the lander and just roll them straight through. So we want to be an express lane for them at some point. They don't necessarily trust us or want us in that capacity yet,
yeah.
but I'd love that to be a capability at some point in the future.
So let's break down your sales process so far. You talked about earlier about getting inbound leads because of, you know, putting out content on LinkedIn, building your authority out there, an expert in this arena. Are you doing anything else on the prospecting side of the business? Are you doing any outbound, cold outreach, and so forth? Or is it strictly on the inbound
It's
side?
100% inbound LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And,
And is
I'll
it,
tell you why.
yeah, break that down for us.
Yeah, yeah, just to break it down. So I've in other roles, and actually I'll go back to my startup because this
Yeah.
illustrates the point. The legal startup for a second.
Yeah.
We had a mix of cold email and cold outbound calls
Yeah.
because we had to get lawyers signed up on this platform. We had no brand, no one knew who the
Yeah.
hell
You
we.
had that.
So I saw both or outbound email and outbound call,
Yeah.
and we were sending probably 50 emails a day because we were
Yeah.
building lists of like who are these lawyers that we can help.
Yeah. And you're manually doing it at this
We're
point.
manually, oh no, actually, we actually had a kind of a CRM set up, so
Okay.
there was some
Yeah.
automation there, but we were just rifling through messages. What does the
Yeah.
subject line say? What does the body of the
Yeah.
content say? And some of the classic advice on cold email is like, be quick, be to the point, be brief. Our winner was the exact opposite. I wrote this like long, gory story of like
Yeah.
one day I needed a lawyer because I was in this tough situation and like it was rambly as hell. It went on for a while.
Yeah. Yeah.
But like it was a personal narrative of like a frustration I had with this problem. And then I connected that and because I had this problem, I started this marketplace. And I
Yeah.
would love for you to give us a chance to build this thing. And all you got to do is put your name on our site and you'll get leads. You don't have to pay
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah.
Right. That was the winner. And all the messages came from there. And they'd say, I
Yeah.
loved your email. That was such a cool story. Can we talk?
Yeah. That's awesome.
And then on that inbound call, when I told them more, I could tell if they were interested or not.
Yeah.
And when they were not, there was nothing I could do to save it. It just wasn't their thing for whatever
No.
reason.
Yeah.
And when they were interested, like the contracts got signed the next day or the day after. Like things moved fast.
Yeah.
Right. Now let's contrast that to the outbound cold pipeline. Everyone was like creeped out. They were like, who are you? What is this?
Yeah.
Everyone was
Yeah.
on defense
Yeah.
because no one wants to say yes to a cold outbound call because they assume you're scamming them somehow. And it's just like the trust level couldn't be lower.
Yeah.
Versus the outbound email, I was just like, outbound email is like, here's me being super vulnerable.
Yep.
I don't have a brand. I don't have a product. I don't have shit. But I do have this story and I have a belief I can solve this
Yeah.
problem. And what that was doing was getting people to connect somehow to my story or my vision or whatever. And that was the thing I could build on from there to do deals. And it's the same thing I do with my LinkedIn content. I am writing all every week about, insights I have. So when people show up, they already believe me. They already trust me. And the question is like, can we come up with business terms to collaborate? There's no real sale for me.
Let me hit on something there.
Yeah.
So we're talking about outbound versus inbound, what works for you. And yet there you're talking about the outbound that you did with that attorney marketplace.
Mhm.
And that is outbound. You're sending it
Yeah.
to your list, but you're taking the same principles that you did in that outbound and you're kind of outbounding it on LinkedIn
That's
because it's
it.
being
That's the thing I
displayed.
did. Yeah. That's the replacement.
It's
Yeah.
being displayed to an audience. So what just clicked with me right there is LinkedIn, you don't necessarily have to think of it as a inbound machine. You're physically putting content and you are distributing that content.
Yeah.
It just happens to be public.
Right.
But you're taking that same mindset. And yeah, you're developing a relationship
Yeah.
with your quote unquote recipients, your audience, you're building trust. So on a trust continuum where you're talking about 0, where they don't know you, to 10, where
Mhm.
it's impeccable trust and they'll buy anything from you that you're willing to sell them, you're able to take them on that journey over time, but you're doing it in public on LinkedIn versus in private on email. So are you doing exclusively LinkedIn or are you doing any type of combination, taking a similar approach that you do on LinkedIn to email?
Exclusively LinkedIn right
Yeah.
now. There's a couple reasons for it now, and I may change my view at this
Yeah.
um, down the road. But there's a couple subtle things about it. So with LinkedIn, people opt in to my content.
Hmm.
So if you're not already connected to me, the algorithm might send something to you that I wrote because
Right.
you're a lender or whatever.
Yeah.
You might see bits and pieces of my stuff. But if you like it and you want to see more, you follow me, and now you're opting in to see more.
Yeah.
I really like that opt-in dimension. It's hard to do that with email. There are some ways to do it with like newsletters and stuff, but I like the opt-in
100%.
side of that. The other thing I think is subtle but important is my buyers are, very senior executives at banks.
Hmm.
Okay. And I think, and if I compare it to lawyers, I was cold emailing lawyers that had their own practice. They weren't, you know, they didn't have the same calendars that these senior execs have at banks.
Yeah.
And look, but I guess where I'm driving on this is like I just figure that a senior executive at a bank isn't going to appreciate if I invade their inbox with a cold, hey, come hire my agency type of thing.
100%.
And the reason
Yeah.
I think that is I was on the other side. I was an exec.
Yeah.
I got 10 of these a day. I never read any of them or took them seriously. So I don't think that's the right channel for this business. I do think cold outbound could work in many other businesses, but I think it's just context dependent. And for what I'm doing, I think I might actually lose points with my customers if I go that direction. So I put a lot of content out, but I wait for someone to knock on my door before we start a conversation. I don't even have a pitch deck, Sean. I don't.
Yeah.
There's no reason for it because by the time they knock on my door, they've seen 20 of my posts and
Yeah.
they're convinced I know what I'm talking about, right? And
Yeah.
by the way, no one's asked to see my pitch deck. If someone asked to see it, like, look, I could come up with one in an afternoon.
Yeah.
It's not like I'm, religiously against it or anything. It just hasn't served a purpose, so and thus I don't have it. Yeah.
I'm laughing because, you know, I went 8 years before I even had a logo and a business card. And
Yeah.
I mean, I had a full blown business because,
Yeah, yeah. So yeah. So you know exactly what I'm talking about.
yeah, you just, you know, it, when when you're when you're building the relationships like that, and it's coming from a place of trust, place of expertise, the other stuff is superfluous. Now,
Yeah.
it's still important to build branding from a visual basis and have tools and things like that to scale. But as you're talking about here, your job is to gain traction and to stay laser focused on that, and anything else is a distraction. So it sounds like you've found a way to get folks into that pipeline. And I know we just have a few minutes left here, but I wanted to touch on one question, then we'll start closing it out.
Mhm.
My question for you is, as you're getting these leads, I'm assuming that they're highly qualified. How do you typically filter them to determine whether it makes sense to go to a discovery exploratory call, or do
Mhm.
you or do you move them to a call regardless at this stage in your business? How do you make that decision? Do you
Yeah.
pre-qualify or do you move right in?
I'm taking like 90% of the inbounds
Yeah.
that come in as a like a 30-minute call. Let's take the vast majority.
Yeah.
But like if like I'll give you an example of a call I didn't take. It was an insurance company asking me for help on their affiliate. Like I don't know, like we serve lenders. So like I was
Yeah.
just like
Yeah.
categorically outside. I'm just like, okay, I'm
Yeah.
not gonna waste your time. Like this doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
But if you're a lender and I looked on your LinkedIn profile and it seems like you have you work at a real company. Like, yeah, I'll
Yeah.
take that call all day. And my approach is listen, provide, if I can give advice right off the cuff on things that will help them, I just give it away, honestly. Like I'm
Yeah.
giving away all sorts of what I think is useful stuff, but that's fine.
Yeah.
And usually there's a point in the conversation where the conversation pivots and someone asks me, it's like, what's your model? What are your rates? How do we do, like,
Yeah.
if we wanted to work, like the other side will ask me a question. I'm not there to pitch anything.
Yeah.
I don't push our services. I don't push our products.
Yeah.
They usually will ask if they're interested. And, it's obvious on my LinkedIn profile that this is like
Yeah.
my focus and what I'm doing. So by the time they contact me, they know this is my primary business. By the way, that wasn't the case last year
Mm.
because I was full time at another company.
Yeah.
So like there were these awkward conversations that like people would be like, so hold on, do you like why did you take this call? How do you make money? Like what's going on here? And I'm like,
Yeah.
look, I'm just networking. Like maybe I'll build an agency one day,
Right.
whatever. And people were like grateful, but I think they were like somewhat confused. Like, because like there's gotta be something in it for me to take the call.
Yeah.
Right. Like, people are used to that reciprocity. That's usually how they go. So like
Yeah.
they're I would say about half of them lead to nothing. It's like, cool, thanks so much. I appreciate you taking the call. They disappear. And then the other half turn into a follow-on conversation.
Yeah.
And then eventually they ask the question of like, hey, if we were to work together, how would this go? So that's the normal flow.
Anything that we haven't talked about today that you think would be important for founders to be thinking about?
Yeah, I'm looking at my notes. So as I was preparing for this conversation, I think you labeled it like structured sales, something like that.
Yeah.
How did you label what like your podcast?
Systematic selling.
Systematic sales. That's okay. That's
Yeah.
it. And I was like, this is funny that I'm on this podcast because I don't consider myself a salesperson. So I asked myself a question of like, what do I think I do?
Yeah.
And the language I came up with is I think I'm a problem solver at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Like I figured out how to solve a particular kind of problem. But I mentioned this to you earlier in like our pre-chat. Knowing how to do something and, you know, providing value,
Yeah.
being valuable doesn't equal monetization. They're
No.
two different things,
Yep.
right? So I think about monetization, two other things at least have to be true. There might be more, but one, you have to communicate the problem you solve very well,
Yep.
and you have to reach the audience who has that problem very well.
Yeah.
If you can't do those two things, like you're not going to monetize, even if you're super valuable and can solve problems. And then number two is you have to be able to deploy what you know into your client.
Yeah.
Like you can't actually translate what you know to them and have them see the value tangibly. You might be able to sign a client or two, but you're not going to do this for 10 years because
Yeah.
at some point someone's going to ask for the case studies and you're not going to have any, right? So
100%.
I've been obsessed lately with signing clients where I think I can build a case study. Whether or not I think the economics are good or not, like I will I can be a little bit more reasonable in cases where I think the case study is going to be incredible
Yeah.
because I know later, a year or two from now, I can share that case study without having any lender's name or respecting kind of the confidentiality of the work. And of course, with the lender's consent, I want to be able to talk about those stories on LinkedIn and in my
Yeah.
writing. So I think that's just an important, like for folks listening that are thinking about pivoting from being a corporate exec to an entrepreneur, you probably already have the expertise. So I wouldn't worry about that. The question is like, do you have the mechanisms to communicate the problem, find your audience, and then deploy the value? And like, if you can convince yourself those things are true, like you probably have a much higher leverage business than what you're doing today, would be my closing thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I know you don't think of yourself as a salesperson, but everything that you described is sales. That ability to identify a problem, to solve that problem, and to draw in the customer, not push the customer, but to draw that customer in where they feel the pain of their problem to want you to solve them. To me, that is the essence of what sales is. That's how that happens. And you hit the nail on the head. Before we go, where can folks find you beyond LinkedIn? Because of course you can go onto your profile there, but
Yep.
where are other places folks can
Uh,
find you?
yeah, LinkedIn is where I spend most of my time, like writing.
Yeah,
I You can email me, Carlos at
yeah.
newmarketgrowth.com. So that's if you're a lender and want to have a conversation around your affiliate program, happy to chat with you. And where else? I'm on Twitter technically. I think you found my profile
Yeah.
there. So the Carlos Caro on Twitter.
Awesome.
I am really struggling to get that channel going. So I am early days there
Yeah.
in Twitter, but there I talk about all sorts of stuff, man. Like I retweet poker pros. Like it's the Wild West. So if you're interested in the other side beyond kind of the polished LinkedIn post, that's where to go. But yeah, I'm rough on the edges. I say all sorts of stuff I probably shouldn't be saying, but that's another
So
place.
that's Carlos After Dark is on the Twitter platform or X platform.
Yeah, I might start posting poker hands I lost or something just to
Yeah.
like amuse some people. But yeah, no, that's where you can find me.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Carlos, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah. No, it was a pleasure, Sean. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. If you liked what you heard, please hit like and subscribe and share this episode with anyone you think will find value in it. In the meantime, I'll leave you with this. Always remember, when you fix your systems, you'll fix your sales. Until next time.